Hi, welcome to part 2 for the crash course of political science class 10th. So in this crash course, the second part, we are going to be looking at 3 chapters. The first one being political parties, chapter 6 from your political science textbook. Now political parties are a very essential part of democracy, especially in a country like India. So what is this big craze about political parties? Why do people associate themselves with political parties and with political leaders to such a great extent? Let us first understand what a political party exactly is. So a political party refers to a group of people coming together to contest elections and hold power in the government. These include leaders, active members and followers. So these parties many functions. And these functions can be grouped under an acronym. This acronym is PCM, food. Very easy to remember, right? PCM is physics, chemistry, maths, and food, of course, you all would be knowing, right? So now starting off with P, which means that the political parties put up many policies and programs to attract vote banks, right? To get more votes, they put up many policies. C stands for contesting elections. They do so because they wish to contest elections. M stands for making laws. So how do they help in making laws? Like in a parliament, there are various political parties, right? And it's only when you get a majority, right? That's when a law is passed. So political parties, the opposition parties might oppose a bill, they might support it. All these things might happen. So thus they also help in the framing of laws. Coming to F, F stands for the forming and running governments. And that is extremely important because many political parties have members who hold ministerial positions, so they hold positions of power, and they of course help in forming and running governments, especially in the era of alliances. Then coming to O, the role of opposition. So opposition is a very important part of democracy as they exert pressure on the government, and they also mobilize opposition. So all those parties that are opposing the government, they try and mobilize. And also they mobilize those people who are unhappy with the government, and thus they try and show the government the various places where they can improve. Right, coming to the next O, that is shaping public opinion. Now political parties have a lot of strength in a country like India. So if a political leader says anything, then it carries a lot of value along with it, and people really take their word, right? So that is why whatever they say, it becomes, trending nowadays, right? So that is why political parties shape public opinion. Lastly, D, and that is details of government machinery. This is not a D is not actually supposed to be used there, but it's for the purpose of this acronym. But political parties allow access to government machinery. So you come to know what is happening within the government as well. What are the welfare schemes being implemented by the government? All these things you come to know, especially also with the coming of RTI, that's Right to Information Act. You can know what is happening and what are the procedures being taken for a certain welfare scheme to be passed as such. So why are political parties needed? A very basic question. Well, the reason is, if you consider, suppose there were no political parties, then independent candidates would have contested. They would only have taken care of the needs of their own constituency. Would that lead to the development of the nation? No, it might not have led to the development of nation because they are only focused on individual constituencies, and this would have only increased factionalism, right? So to help in unifying, forces, and to help in the development of the nation as a whole, it is very important to have political parties, and that is the main reason why political parties are there in a diverse country like India. Now let's move on to how many parties we should have. So there are different party systems followed across the world. For instance, in China, they follow the one-party system, which means only one party, that's the CCP, the Communist Party of China, that is allowed to come to power. Another type of party system is a two-party system, like what is done in US, where only the Democrats and the Republicans can come to power. Other than that, no other party is allowed to be formed. Then in Britain also, it's only the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, very few other parties as such. This is called a two-party system. In India, there is a multi-party system, and that you would have observed, right? So many parties are present, right? And why is that? Because of India's diversity, because the number of sects India has, the number of regions and diverse cultures India possesses, it requires the establishment of multiple political parties. And in India, as I told you before, you have the NDA, the National Democratic Alliance, and UPA, the United Progressive Alliance. So, which is the best? Should it be the multi-party system or should it be a two-party system? Well, multi-party system suits the context of India, but perhaps in different countries, according to their context, they can adopt the right kind of party system. Now, we will look at the difference between national political parties and state political parties. Now, national political parties are parties that have their units in various states, and they are also accorded certain special privileges by the Election Commission, like a unique symbol. On the other hand, state political parties are political parties that have their bases only in one or two states, right? They don't have their bases right throughout their countries, unlike the national parties that are nationwide parties. Now, what is the criteria on which we decide what is a national party and what is a state party? Now, for a party to become a national party, it needs to win 6% of the votes in the Lok Sabha elections, or it needs to win 6% votes in assembly elections in 4 states, right? And along with that, it at least needs to have 4 seats in the Lok Sabha. So in the General Assembly, it should be able to win at least 4 seats. Now, on the other hand, for state political parties, right? For them, for becoming a state party, you require to win 6% of the votes in the assembly election in one state, and along with that, you need to win at least 2 seats in that state as well. So now moving on to the major national political parties in India. There are 6 national political parties in India, and you would have heard of political parties in India basically face 4 challenges, and these, as it should be in a democracy, are directly linked to the people. The first one is lack of internal democracy. So there are no organizational meetings held. You need to be loyal to the leader, but members do not know what is happening, in the leadership of the party. What is happening? What are the key decisions they are taking? So this leaves many people unaware, and this is something that needs to be sorted out, because parties cannot be dominated by certain people, and this is what leads to the second major challenge faced by political parties, and that is dynastic succession. So both these points are interrelated. And what is dynastic succession means? When one family dominates over the internal affairs of that party. This means that other people who might be interested in holding power and who might have a genuine interest in the welfare of the people, they might not stand a chance to contest elections. And we have seen examples like Sharad Pawar and Mamata Banerjee seceding from the Congress party because of the dominance of the Gandhi family. So in this manner, internal democracy is compromised. Then we move on to the third major challenge, and that is of money and muscle power. Something that people experience to a great extent, because what happens is many a times parties have these certain people who have a lot of muscle power or who have a lot of money, and they bribe voters to vote for them. And this is something that democracy just does not want, because we want the leaders who can bring about change to actually go and hold power. We don't want leaders who have given bribes or who don't have any ideas as such for the nation to actually come and hold power in the government. That is not what we want. So for democracy to actually move forward, we require people who are capable and not those who have money in their hands, right? And then lastly, lack of choice. So many a times what happens is 2 or more parties put up very similar manifestos. So it gives, it actually confuses people to a large extent. Whom should we vote for? Because they are also saying the same thing. This party is also saying the same thing. Whom should we vote for? And that actually confuses the voters to a large extent. Right? One example of that, as you would have read recently, was in Tamil Nadu. AIADMK and DMK put up very similar manifestos. So in this manner, you can see how voters also are confused because of lack of a meaningful choice. So now we will talk about the various steps taken to reform political parties. The first one, of course, being the Anti-Defection Amendment. Now, what does this amendment say? From now on, if any political member of a political party, if he or she defects, then that person will lose the seat that is present with him or her, right? So if an MP or MLA defects, then that seat, it becomes vacant, and this has prevented defection to a large extent, right? Secondly, that the Supreme Court passed an order that from now on, all the candidates who are contesting elections, they need to file an affidavit informing the court about all their property and the various criminal cases pending against them, right? So that money and muscle power is also prevented. And lastly, Election Commission has made it mandatory for every party to hold organizational elections and for all members to file income tax returns as well. But these elections are held, yet it has not helped in bringing about internal democracy within parties. Sometimes they are held in fraudulent manners, right? Now let's move on to the various steps that can be taken in the future. Firstly, that women should be given 1/3 seats in general elections. That's something that's been pending since long, but that's also a suggestion. Secondly, that the government should create a separate fund for elections. That is also another suggestion. Thirdly, a law should be made to regulate the internal affairs of the parties so that it does not become the rule of a certain family. Instead, everyone's needs are taken care of, right? And then there are two other points made in your textbook, and the first one is that people should put pressure on political parties to reform from within. And secondly, that if people feel that they can bring about a change in society, they can actually help in development, then they must themselves join political parties. They must take the onus on themselves and they must join the correct political parties so that they can try and reform that political party. So that is what is the main idea of democracy, where people have the opportunity to bring about a change in the country. So I hope that this chapter was clear. Now we'll come to the last two chapters that actually give a complete summary of what we have been learning since the very first chapter. And the first chapter that we'll look at now is the outcomes of democracy. Now this chapter, outcomes of democracy, is like a report card of democracy, right? So has democracy succeeded in various respects? That question we will be answering by looking at this chapter. Let's first start off with accountability. Now what does accountability mean? I'm a voter. I elect a leader. That leader is supposed to be accountable to me, which means I have chosen him. That means he should be able to fulfill my promises, and if he does not do that, I have a right to change the leader next time, right? That is what an accountable government is, right? A government for the people, where I as a voter can decide whom I'm voting for and can accordingly change him with the change if I'm not satisfied with his performance, right? That is about accountable government. Now along with accountability comes something else which is called as deliberation and negotiation, right? Now in a democracy, unlike in a non-democracy where decisions are just passed by one or two persons who are in a position of power, in a democracy, taking any decision, making any law takes up a lot of time, right? Because you all know about the procedure in which a bill is passed, right? So a bill goes through both the houses, and then if it is not, the assent is not given by the president, it is again repeated, the procedure is repeated, and so it might take years and years to pass a certain bill. And that is one reason where democracy is often criticized. But one reason which completely defends democracy on that note is that when decisions take a lot of time to be made, right? Decisions, before you come to a conclusion, if it takes a lot of time, it ensures that they are more acceptable. And that all those parts of a certain law that should be eliminated are eliminated, right? No decision is taken in haste. And that is why democracy is always preferred. Another third way why democracy actually is much better than a non-democracy is transparency. Greater transparency. So in a democracy, people can get to know what is happening inside the government, and they can know how decisions are made. Now, along with the Right to Information Act being passed in 2005, now people have the right to know what is happening within the government, the internal processes that are happening, and we can be aware of that, right? So that is why democracy is much more superior than a non-democracy. But where does democracy falter? What are the various criticisms against a democracy? Firstly, that democracies fall short in providing a fair chance to everyone to contest elections. Like we saw in the last chapter, dynastic succession takes place, only a few selected people get to contest elections, right? So that is one thing. Secondly, only a few subjects are put up for debate. Certain subjects, it depends on how media projects certain issues, and if the media does not project those issues, then the debate does not happen at all, and sometimes debates take place on trivial issues. That is one more reason. And thirdly, that democracies many a times suppress minorities. Also, that we have seen, there are certain parties, political parties, that focus on only developing certain sections of society and leaving certain sections out. That is very much undemocratic. And fourthly, of course, the routine tales of corruption that we have been hearing since so long. So corruption takes place, and that has something that has eroded the very spirit of democracy. But there is one aspect in which democracy is way more superior than a non-democracy or a dictatorship or any other form of government. And that is that democracy is people's own government. It is people who elect their leaders, and the leaders are of course accountable to them. So because the people are directly involved in policy making, that is why democracy is far more superior than any other form of government. Now, when we look at the development of any country, we naturally look at the economy of that country. Has the economy developed? Where has the GDP gone? And in that, democracy does not have all that good a record. So from between 1950 and 2000, dictatorships, it seems, had a higher growth rate in economy. So the economies of dictatorships grew more faster than those of democracies. But we cannot expect democracies to lag behind that far. It is not like there is a great difference between the two, between democracies and dictatorships. Yes, there is a difference, and dictatorships are a little ahead on that respect. But at the same point of time, if democracies work for the people, it is very much possible that they also will focus on the economy and will focus on the growth of the economy. So that is something that happens over a period of time, and perhaps in a few years we might see democracies also coming in line with dictatorships and perhaps overtaking them. Now, one thing that everyone expects from any government, not only a democracy but especially from a democracy, is that it reduces inequalities and it also reduces poverty. But has democracy done that over the years? No, it has not. Yes, it has given equal rights to everyone to come and vote. One vote, one value is followed in democracy. But still there are a small number of ultra-rich people who enjoy many more privileges than those who are from the poor classes or the backward castes. And this is something that has been happening over the years, and it's a worrying sign, because this is also something that a democracy has not been able to sort out. The few people who are extremely rich, the big businessmen, the big industrialists, they enjoy a lot of luxuries, whereas the others are kind of left in an uncertain, left in oblivion, not knowing where they are going, and they don't have many opportunities to foresee. So in that respect, democracy has definitely not done enough for the poor people and to eradicate poverty. Now let's come to another plus point of a democracy, and that is that democracies help in accommodating social differences, right? So what are the two things that democracies must take into consideration as they do so? The first one is that the majority should work along with the minority for the benefit of the country, for developing the country. Now, in a democracy, it is very natural that the majority will form the government, right? Which means that the party that wins the maximum number of seats, that goes past 272, will be able to form the government. But that does not mean that they take decisions, just arbitrarily. They have to take into consideration the views of other political parties, of other leaders, to finally come to a decision. Secondly, and very importantly, a rule by majority should not become rule by majority in terms of community. It should not become rule of a certain religion. That is something completely undemocratic, because democracy means that everyone should be given an equal chance to come and contest elections and to contribute towards the development of the nation. So no, it should not become the majority of a certain community. Now we shall look at one area again, one aspect that puts democracy way over its counterparts, and that is that it provides dignity and freedom to the individual. So it gives equality, which means that everyone is treated equally, and at the same time many freedoms are given to people. These kind of freedoms are not given in other regimes. So for instance, people have the freedom to express themselves freely, people have the freedom to criticize the government. This is not provided in non-democratic regimes, and this has led to women also asserting themselves, to the end of a patriarchal society, to the gradual end, even though it is still prevalent. But the fact that feminists are coming up and are saying that we require equal rights for men and women, the fact that they're just putting that points forth is a testimony to the greatness of democracy, right? And at the same point of time, what does democracy do? It also allows for a continuous examination, which means democracy's examination never gets over. Your examination will get over soon, but examination will never get over. Why? Because the world changes over a period of time. It's dynamic, right? So people will get in new ideas, and the very fact that they are bringing in new ideas to ensure that equality is maintained, the very fact that they are getting directly involved in policy making is again testimony to the greatness of democracy and to the value of democracy. Thus, this chapter basically, when you conclude reading this chapter, it basically tells you that you must value existing in a democracy. We all must remember that the fact that we are able to do so much of work for each other, the fact that we are able to express ourselves freely, is just because that we are living in a wonderful environment where we are allowed to express ourselves freely. So we must value that, and we must have gratitude for the various leaders who have contributed to bringing about this change. So I hope that you have understood this full report card of democracy, and now we'll move to the last chapter, that is the challenges to democracy. Now that we have looked at the various outcomes of democracy, it is time to look at certain challenges that democracy faces. Now, it's not like everything is going perfectly in a democracy. There are certain issues, and we discussed a few of them in the last chapter. So thus we can say that the promise of democracy is far from realized, right? You have lack of economic development, still the rich are holding lot of assets, still the poverty is widespread. There are so many other problems that are present in a democracy. So what is the challenge basically? Now these are, we just use a general word challenge, but a challenge very specifically alludes to something that is significant, a problem that is significant but which can be overcome. Thus, there is an opportunity that lies within that challenge, and we must see it in that way. We must not see challenge as something that is negative or something that will make us move towards a non-democratic regime. We must see a challenge in that manner that will actually strengthen a democracy, right? So let's start off with the first challenge, that is the foundational challenge. The foundational challenge basically refers to the transition to democracy. Now we have seen in many countries like Nepal, right? So you saw in Nepal how in 2006 a revolution happened, and how finally a democracy was once again bestowed over there. So, you know, there are so many places where democracy has been bestowed. So the first thing is that we must have a democratic government. Before we go on to its institutions and to the sharing of power, the first and foremost thing that needs to happen is that a democratic regime should be set up. Then comes the challenge of expansion, which is the second step, you know. So like suppose you want to start off a company. The first thing is you need to think about it, right? You need to think about it, and you need to put in the foundation stones. That's the foundational challenge. Then comes the challenge of expansion, which means like you need to recruit good members, you need to try and get good furniture, all these things. Similarly, with the challenge of expansion in democracy as well, you require the values of democracy to be spread across all regions, and very less decisions should be undemocratic. Or in simpler words, most of the decisions taken by the government should be democratic, and local governments should be given sovereignty, women should be treated equally. All these things should happen. So basic idea of democracy should be widespread, right? It should go to each and every household. That's the challenge of expansion. So now let's come to the deepening of democracy. So like now you have established the company, now members are also there, but now you need to ensure that your company becomes one of the best in the world. So you get profits, you get more stakeholders, all these things. For that to happen, what do you need to do? You need to ensure that as an institution, you function effectively, the processes happen well, the clients also are treated well, and also the people working in your office, they are also loyal to you and you are loyal to them, something like that. So similarly in a democracy as well, it is very important that the various institutions get strengthened. So be it the legislature, the executive, the judiciary, all these various institutions that are present, they all need to be strengthened to such an extent that people can trust them and people have lesser and lesser complaints regarding these institutions as such, right? And more importantly, people are treated equally and poverty is also to a large extent eradicated. That is our hope, and that is why it's a challenge, right? So challenge of deepening of democracy basically means that it must all the institutions must begin to think about the welfare of society now that they have been established, right? Now let's move on to political reform. Now, political reform is basically the mechanism through which we can counter all these challenges that we have just mentioned above. So to counter all these challenges, there are various ways you can use. The first and the most common way is, of course, by passing a law, right? So anything that is going wrong, you pass a law to ban it. You basically want to ban undesirable things. But does that always work? Now they have given an analogy to cricket, right? So in cricket also the LBW rules and all, batsmen have to follow that, bowlers have to follow that, umpires will give their decisions, right? But ultimately this needs to be enforced by the captains, the coaches, and also the umpires on the field. If they are not there, then there's no point of that law being there. If only because the umpires are standing over there and are keeping a watch, that is why these laws are being enforced. So similarly, even in politics, it is important that political organizations and various other committees that have been formed, all of them ensure that the laws are being enforced. It is not going to be, everyone does not give respect to the law. That's a fact, right? It's a matter of fact that everyone does not respect the law. Only if political leaders take up the initiative to try and implement it themselves, to try and not go against the laws, because they are like the idols for all the citizens. So if they do that, then only the citizens will also get that reassurance that yes, our politics is moving towards a safer direction. Now the second one is, of course, that banning does not work always. When you ban anything, then automatically it creates a lot of ramifications and a lot of problems arise because of that. It also causes polarization sometimes. So instead of banning, you must try and at how these policies or these laws will manifest into everyday politics. And for that, it is very important to understand that citizens are directly involved, people are directly involved. So more the involvement of people, better will the result of that law being passed will be, right? So that is why it's very important for people to be directly involved, because that is what is the hallmark of democracy. Let's come to the third point, which is that this needs to happen principally through political practice. Once again, a subset of that, which means that this should ultimately lead to better political participation. More people should come out to vote. More people should contest as well. More people should come up and say that we will bring about a change in society, right? That is what is democracy. And lastly, it depends on who will implement it, right? Who is the person or who is that group that will decide how these reforms will go about. Now, one example I'd like to give you, this is not given in a textbook, but it's something that is just happening, and that's about the Lokpal, right? This is an anti-corruption ombudsman. So this is being head by Justice Ghosh, who's a former justice in the Supreme Court, and he is doing this role now. He is the chairman of the Lokpal committee, and they will ensure now that any corruption acts that are going on in the government, or any civil servant is doing any kind of corruption, they are going to be keeping a check, and they are going to be imposing sanctions as well. So all this is happening. So now you can see that how a former Supreme Court judge is the head of this panel, because he has good amount of knowledge about how to counter this corruption, right? So it also depends on who will implement it. That's why you can't choose any Tom, Dick and Harry to take up such a big role. They have chosen a judge because of the very reason that we require corruption to completely move away, and for that we require a rational head to work on it, right? So that's why he's the chairman, and there are many other people under him. So this is just an example to elucidate my point. Now the last part is pretty much a summary of what you have learned right throughout the last 2 years. So at the end of this tour of democracy, what can we conclude with? The last statement in this chapter is you think, which means in democracy, we have the freedom to think and to express ourselves, to think independently and to have independent thoughts of our own, right? So I would urge all of you to have your own thoughts. How should this country develop? How should the world develop? How should the world become a better place to live in? Because we are the future. We are the people who are going to be contributing towards the development of the world as a whole, right? The future is not about only restricting yourself to development of nation. It's about overall development, cumulative development, right? So we must all focus on how development can take place overall. So I hope that this crash course was helpful for you to revise at the last moment. And if you indeed found it helpful, do press the like button, do subscribe to my channel, and do share these videos with all your friends so that they also get a lot of help before the exam. And do continue following my channel. Lots of exciting videos coming up, including videos on general knowledge, right, on general topics, and also on the IPL. So see you soon, and thank you so much for tuning into my channel. Best of luck.